Welcome everyone to today's podcast. As usual, our speaker, Ron, is going to be interviewing a professional today, and I hope everyone can get some good information from their conversation. So if you're not aware, this is hosted by ReSourceYYC, and we are a co-working space in Calgary. We focus on co-working for professionals. So we have dedicated desks, private office spaces, and mail services. So if you're ever in need, come check us out. And today we have Kelly Therrien, who is the Director of Operations at Hyperi Group Inc. So I'll pass it over to you, Ron.
Good. Thanks, Rosemary. Yeah, and just a reminder, anyone who wants to come down, check out ReSourceYYC, get to meet Rosemary, and it's a great place to connect. And especially nowadays where people are working hybrid from home and the office, if you just need a place to hang out downtown, come down to ReSourceYYC. So with that, we're doing our conversations with consultants series, and part of this is really to help build community. So we have a community at ReSourceYYC. We also help to build a community in a bigger sense within consultants and professionals within Calgary. And part of that, we like to interview some and do podcasts with some really cool people that are doing some cool initiatives. And today we have Kelly Therrien with us. Thanks for joining us, Kelly.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
Yeah, so you've been in the industry about 20 years in heavy equipment fabrication and mining and pulp and processing industry in Western Canada. And after all that time, this year, you started a new company on your own, Hyperi, and it's focused on building and implementing programs for maintenance reliability, sustainability, and tech. So tell us a bit more about this new venture. What is Hyperi?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me today on the chat here. And so one of the things that I noticed when being out in industry was that there was a need for some more help in this space in reliability and maintenance technology. It's moving so fast; it's really hard to keep up with a lot of the changes. And a lot of the larger manufacturing companies and process companies are having resource constraints like everybody else, and they have a lot of great initiatives that they want to execute, and they're having trouble either staffing up to execute those initiatives, or they're having trouble deciding maybe how to prioritize them or what they should be doing in the first place. So between those two or three things, we decided there was a good space for us there to try and enter the market and start helping some people out.
And your background, so your flip sides now, so you really were, for the most part, working for big companies along the way. So this is very familiar territory. Maybe tell us a bit about the companies that you actually work with, and kind of what led you up. What was your journey that led you up to now being consulting on the other side?
Sure. So I initially started out as working in the fabrication side of manufacturing, so heavy industry, heavy attachment, farming, natural gas, all sorts of agriculture, mining, all sorts of fabrication for different industries. And then I moved into the resources, so into mining, and I worked for companies like Mosaic and Nutrien in that space, in their maintenance reliability departments and helping them build programs for their facilities. Then moving into the pulp and paper industry here in Alberta, and working for West Fraser, it opened my eyes even further to the need for this type of company to be even based in Alberta and local. Yeah. with the labor shortages.
So I'm curious. So it opened your eyes because each of those industries were so different, or it opened your eyes because it turns out to be some of the same problems in each industry?
That's exactly it. It's the same problems over and over again. I was going from facility to facility, from company to company, and it was kind of like deja vu in each company. You know, there's reliability culture issues. There's program efficiency issues where they're not leveraging the tools even that they currently own or have. They're not leveraging them to the full capability that they can. So taking all of that and moving from industry to industry, it was really amplified by COVID, especially. when at all these different companies, we had different groups in there helping, and COVID limited the availability of those people to be on site and build those relationships with companies. And so, relationships suffered during that time. Project progress suffered at that time, and it really kind of highlighted the need for some of that support to be more local and to Alberta and the West.
So that's interesting. So a lot of companies during COVID all of a sudden went from, we have to do everything face to face, to, oh, it turns out we can be more remote. But you're seeing that even with COVID, that being remote for some of these actually didn't help them, or is there a whole niche around helping some companies be more remote on some of that?
Well, so, some of it is that on the tech implementation side, there's a lot of tech that requires people to be present, and you can't do an equipment inspection from your home. You have to be in the field, and the tech is there to help leverage those things. But when it comes to like large project management or initiatives like that, as well as I do, there's a huge cultural component to those projects and those initiatives. And when you can't see people and interact with people, it doesn't become an issue for a little while, but over time it tends to drift. The relationships start to get strained, and things tend to drift out. And the other big component to that is cost. So when you have some groups coming from overseas or from another country doing this type of work, the costs ramp up so fast when you're paying hundreds of dollars an hour plus everything else, travel, it adds up very quickly. And so this is a much more value add proposition, having local people to do some of this work.
Yeah, and locals. So you're based in Calgary, but local would be Western Canada for you then.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because even so this is a bit of my background before, but even the culture. Well, maybe I'll ask you this: how have you found the culture of Western Canada varies from, say, international or other locations around the maintenance and reliability?
Well, I find that a lot of the facilities that I've worked in and that I talk with and work with Hyperi is that a lot of them are very remote. They are kind of off the beaten path, and they really require people to become part of the community there almost, if that makes sense. Yep. It's a very community oriented approach where people rely on each other because there's no other support for miles, and you have to rely on each other to build those strong relationships and pick up the phone when somebody calls, because if you don't, that person's going in alone to a rough situation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, is like sometimes, and maybe even if someone watches podcast, by merely seeing your face and hearing you breaks down some of that barrier to actually now have that conversation, right? Or they wouldn't even pick up the phone. Even better, that is face to face, right? So that's interesting. Exactly. And in my experience, a lot of times, well, some of the stuff, it isn't magic, but they just need someone to help them through and be supporting them, and someone they trust, right? So so a lot of that local and face to face is really about building a trust, in my mind, a bit of a trust support, right? So
and there are times where remote work can be leveraged again to save on costs. So you save the commuting costs, you save things like LOA and meals and those types of things for maybe some of that more data oriented work where you can do some of that data work, but then when it's time to go back to the field and do some implementation and those types of things, then you're available, you're much closer.
Well, actually, let's actually talk about some specifics then. So it sounds like Hyperi actually does a few different types of services, right? Around, I mean, maintenance and reliability is a huge area. Same with sustainability and tech, right? That's just huge. But let's narrow it down. Actually, let's talk specifically about some, your background. I think you can do all kinds of things, but what would you see a typical type of engagement for Hyperi that companies may be looking for?
So one of the major components of my personal background and what I've been instilling in the company is around technology and inspections. So for a long time in Nutrien, I rolled out a very large robust program for you can call it operator care or operator driven reliability, those types of things. But those operator or maintenance field programs where they're doing inspections on live equipment, that they can eliminate time on their PMs and downtime inspections by doing them live. And so integrating technology into that through tablets, software, various hardware, sensors, and building those programs. And again, with that comes a large change management portion about people embracing technology, learning it, training programs. So it goes very deep once you start talking about an inspections program like that. Some of the other things that we've been working on is discussions around MRO optimization and bills of materials, hierarchy, that whole piece of maintenance and reliability, kind of that data side of things. And we have a partnership with an MRO AI company that uses AI tools to help right size your MRO and either reduce the cost of your inventory based on risk, or reduce your risk, because now with the supply chain struggles, the inventory management has shifted a lot from a cost management project to more of a risk management project. So a lot of people have started to increase inventories rather than decrease them.
That's a huge point right now, because I think a lot of my career was around reducing costs and just-in-time delivery, and that's been turned completely upside down, because the lost production from not having a part could equal all the savings you had in reducing your inventory, right? So do you have any examples or anything around that might resonate with some companies?
So, I mean, there's a whole bunch I could point to, but let's just take a simple drive belts for a motor and pump orientation. And typically, maybe you might have stocked 8 of those drive belts, and due to lead times and stuff in the past and cost, you could maybe get away with going down to 4 if you had 2 applications of 4 drive belts, let's say, and you were carrying 8. Now what companies are doing, the lead times on these objects have went up drastically. And so instead of actually going down to 8 or 4 from 8, companies are actually looking at going up to 12 from 8. So it's understanding all of that information based on your criticality, your lead times, your costs, and the AI tools and these new amazing tools help calculate that and in real time. So you might be able to go up and then come back down later on.
And you can actually help put a value proposition around that to the company. And do you incorporate production losses and things like that into the calculation?
Well, the tool, the AI tool itself calculates a lot of the, I guess I could call it that impartial data that we would use just based on will it be here if you need it, and then the cost would come through putting together the project plan and proposal on our side.
Well, maybe actually let's just keep pulling some of these threads. So a lot of what you do would be perceived as extra cost, right? Putting in programs like that and preventive maintenance and inspection and all that sort of thing. How do you help companies on that value part of it by putting those extra costs in with the programs? Where do they really see the value, companies, of that effort?
So I like to talk about the economic value of projects, and then the non-economic value of projects, right? So on the economic value of projects, you have to consider these things like downtime, right? Lost production, downtime due to missing parts, or failures that weren't caught in time, or failures that were caught in time, but your backlog is so massive that you don't get to them. Those types of things. So there's a big economic proposal there for improvements and those types of projects. On the non-economic side, you have all these things like work-life balance. You have employee motivation. So one project that we're talking in discussions with right now is about really cleaning up a bunch of old inventory that wasn't used. And it's really driving motivation issues and safety concerns at the facility because they have just too much laying around, too much stuff. So there's a bunch of non-economical benefits to these types of projects as well.
Cool. And so this is a bit of a leading question, but a lot of companies go through cycles of maintenance and reliability. and they get it all set up, and then for some reason it just falls apart again, right? And then eventually you come back in, and it, over my career, it's gone through a few cycles. Have you seen some of that? And maybe you can talk to how you build sustainable programs, right? Because I think in my past, I've seen good initiatives, and they're as good as the one person that's leading it. And if that person leaves or the companies change ownership, it just all falls apart. So is there anything, well, I'm pretty sure Hyperi could help with that, but there's some systemic issues. So maybe I want to talk about how companies can overcome that, and maybe some of the things you can do to help it be more sustainable. How's that for a long question?
No, but I love the question, Ron. I think that is one of the most important aspects of reliability, especially because, like you say, there's cycles of reliability. It seems to be in facilities, and why isn't it sustainable, right? And I feel, and we feel at Hyperi, that the big thing that makes something sustainable is integration. So a lot of times these programs are seen as almost like a bolt-on or an add-on to your program, when they have to become part of the program. They have to be part of the program. And when initiatives don't get integrated properly, you might have picked the most effective way to do something, but it's not efficient in your processes. So people will start to go around them, skirt them, and do all those kinds of things that eventually dwindle the care for the program, or the perception of the program, and eventually people will lose interest in it, or they tend to let it go. So that's actually one of the 5 values that Hyperi has in it, is integration, and making sure that things are integrated so they can be effective as well as efficient. And I think that efficient part is what's missing in a lot of the program development.
So do you have any, like, a tangible example of either a location that you've seen this in the past for a benefit, or a piece of equipment, or any examples that would fit that?
Yeah, sure. So I can go back to when I built this big inspections program, or implemented this big inspections program. We could have done a much better job of integrating that into the business process. And what do I mean by that, right? That's building a RACI, right? So people know their responsibilities, know their job descriptions, and what their role is in that program, so that when times come where it's some piece of the program is not being executed as it needs to be, people know who to talk to about that, and maybe what the struggles that person or group is having, not meeting their responsibilities. So that's just one example of an integration issue that I've seen, right?
And Hyperi,
Sorry,
Hyperi, that's all part of what you guys can offer, is help not only put the programs, like the executable part of the programs, but actually how to manage the programs as well.
Well, that's part of the integration piece, that when we take on a program or a project, it's about that. And some projects are integration because they're not going to really turn into a business process. But let's say even managing bills and materials. Well, who's going to update the bills and materials once they're all accurate and things change, right? You have to build that extra piece into it so that people know whose responsibility it is to update it or remove it if changes happen, right?
So a lot of people there's a lot of new technology and some really cool things that can be applied. And then there's also just some very fundamental good business type things. So I'm curious. So what are some of we'll start with the higher tech thing. What are some of the higher tech thing? You always talked about AI and that, some of the higher tech solutions that you guys can help bring companies?
So there's obviously a pile of software right now. There's a pile of hardware for various applications. We're getting into AR headsets, VR, design on plants and doing things in the field like that. So really any of that kind of tech that a company is looking at implementing in the field, Hyperi can help with the program management of that. So dealing with the change management with the people in the field, and building that comfort with technology with the people, whether that's through training or practical uses and coaching in the field. Those types of things are that. So some of the, I mentioned AI for MRO. So that's one. I have a meeting scheduled for next week to talk about companies that can develop their own AI inside their company for whatever purpose that they want. And so this has been the benefit of working with groups like ReSourceYYC and going to these conferences and stuff, which I never really had time to do when I was up to my ears in problems in a facility. So now that I've kind of went to the other side, we could call it, I'm able to find these amazing solutions that are coming out now and helping bring those to companies.
So that's interesting, actually. So part of Hyperi is actually doing some of that business scouting and intelligence, kind of bringing business intelligence into companies then. So any successful ones that we haven't talked a bit about the AI stuff. Is there some successful technology that you think every company should be looking at applying?
Well, I've been working closely with an actual supply company that supplies MRO materials and those types of things. And what they're doing is they've integrated sustainability tracking into their ordering process and their shipping process. So as you order MRO materials, it's tracking your sustainability impacts on that. So how many products came from an indigenous company, or how much value came from an indigenous company, how much value came from or carbon was created for that product. Those types of things. They're starting to track a lot of those ESG metrics coming from their MRO. So that's, there's a lot of really interesting cutting edge stuff that's coming out to help companies do a lot of this tracking. Because on the sustainability front, there's a lot of talk about scope 3 emissions and clients doing work for industry and being able to track those emissions, because these large companies are being forced to track their emissions.
That's interesting. So a lot of the kind of software as a service companies can actually build in, well, specifically the one you're working with, I guess, can build in some of that. So that's cool. On the opposite end, what are some just low tech stuff that companies are failing on and could use some help on that you're seeing across the industry?
I think the biggest one, it's such a fundamental piece to maintenance and reliability, is lubrication.
Okay.
And lubrication seems to be an issue at a lot of facilities. I don't know, the lubrication techs aren't seen as technical people. And it's a very technical role. And a lot of people just treat it as going around with a grease gun and shoot grease, right? And you can get very technical in that space as well, with ultrasound tools and various things like that. But just the basics of identifying all your points that you need to do lubrication and applying it when it needs it, those two basic fundamental things are lacking in almost every facility.
And I think this is kind of one of those motherhood things, but what if you don't have a good lubrication program in place? What is going to happen?
Eventually you start seeing all of your equipment life deteriorate, because almost everything in a plant that does process rotates, and anything that rotates needs lubrication. And if you maybe your points and your people are getting to the points, but if your cleanliness isn't there, again, it's going to drag down your life of your equipment. And one of the things I really like about lubrication is that lubrication, when equipment life is predicted, it's based on a certain cleanliness of your oil or your lubrication. And you can get cleaner than that a lot of times. They use like a baseline, and you can get cleaner than that. And when you get cleaner, your life actually extends more than your estimated life at the beginning. So that's a way that you can create more reliability in your equipment by extending.
Is that something new? I mean, that's calculatable, right? You could sit down and say, if we do this around lubrication, we can expect a longer life expectancy and less failure. Life expectancy, less failure.
Oh yeah, there's charts and graphs that show the expected life of equipment based on cleanliness, and every ISO code that it moves, it deteriorates or recovers a certain amount of equipment life. And you can do that calculation very easily to understand that whether it's contamination of particles or contamination of water, the life that you're losing on your equipment.
And that's something actually that most places that do maintenance or mechanics, they know they should do it, but sometimes don't have the language and the tools to actually to prove it and demonstrate it, where it sounds like Hyperi can come in and really add that value add to help. Sometimes it's either help get maintenance programs to actually do the lubrications properly. I suspect on the other side, it's justify the effort that they're putting into those programs, right?
And a lot of times what we see in those types of programs is that costs go down for your lubrication because you're not over lubricating.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
Right? So a lube person might be going there and lubricating that point every week and using half a tube of grease. Where it only needs a quarter of a tube of grease a month. So you're decreasing the cost of your lubrication. Also, if you're changing oils, let's say on a mileage basis or a hours basis, without sampling the oil to actually understand what the life of the oil is at, you can extend the life of that use of that oil in that piece of equipment by sampling it, understanding it, and then doing it all on a condition rather than just time-based.
Oh, so I'm curious, what do you see some of the barriers that maybe we'll talk about how they maybe aren't barriers, but what are some of the barriers for companies hiring consulting company like Hyperi to come in to help them? And then on the flip side, what are some of the barriers you're seeing that companies aren't looking at a company like Hyperi?
So some of the challenges, I guess, currently right now have been that in conversations with a lot of companies, they're, let's say, budgeting for next year, right? So their budget cycle's off a little bit, so they have to budget projects for the future. They're getting green lights for projects internally, but holding off for some sort of reason in the current economic landscape. So those are some things that we've been seeing recently. A few canceled projects here and there, but those are some of the challenges that we've been seeing so far in
and do you help organizations put proposals together to help them justify some of the projects that they'd like to do that might include Hyperi?
Absolutely. Project proposals are a big part of what we have to do to help show these, like what we talked about, the economic benefits and the non-economic benefits of executing some of this work. And the thing is with reliability, the way I always look at reliability, especially that vertical, is that it's a lot of like your personal health, right? The longer you take to take care of it and turn things around, the more you deteriorate, right? To the point where everybody wants to be a bodybuilder, but if you're not putting in the time or the effort of lifting weights, you delay that. It's just going to take you even longer to turn around and become a bodybuilder in the end. So
or on the flip side, people just say, well, I'll never be a bodybuilder, so why do I bother, right? So even just getting started, and this would be, I won't even talk about myself, but even on maintenance programs, waiting until you can be perfect is probably not the answer as much as starting at some places that add the most value right away, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of touching on the article that I wrote for ReSourceYYC a few weeks ago, is you don't have to wait to be perfect to start doing projects and doing things. So a lot of people, what I've seen, a lot of people get hung up on, I'll just call them best practices. Right? And if it's not a best practice, it's dismissed almost, right? But the thing with continuous improvement is that as long as you're improving, you're taking a step in the right direction every day. You don't have to wait for that perfect moment, right? I always preach progress over perfection, because that continuous improvement pays off more in the long run than.
It's funny you say best practices. I actually almost try to take that out of my vocabulary, because people I've worked with in the industry, you want successful practices, right? Because the best practice is something that only the best can achieve. Successful practices are something that a whole bunch of people can achieve, right? And add value
the best practice part is I find it's very useful if you're going to say start a greenfield project with a new company and there's no business processes you need to adapt to. But I've seen that the real world doesn't just let you implement a best practice that came from a book somewhere. You have to do what's best for your company to get those results, right? And that is something that that we help facilitate.
Cool. We have a few minutes left. You started companies before. You get a chance. Well, you started a company before, but you had a chance to do it again. Any learnings from starting Hyperi that were valuable to you, or you're glad you didn't have to repeat again?
Yeah, there's life is full of learnings, right? So on the company side of things, it's been about I would say developing the right partnerships.
Yeah,
I think has made a big impact. Not doing things before you need to. So not trying to like pre-anticipate any type of initiative you need to start in building your own company. Let's say it's like hire 10 people, right? You don't need to do that until you need to do that. So don't proactively, I guess, go after some of those things that are that make it more stressful and harder to build a business.
That's right. Yeah. Well, cash flow is king. Yeah. So don't spend cash before you need it. But you only have so many hours in a day. So resource flow is huge. And when you're a small company, there's only a few resources, right? So
well, exactly. And relationships, right? Building relationships, building partnerships with other people in the community was a big thing I learned from past business ventures. Was that I had done some, but I hadn't done enough.
Yeah. And
it made it more difficult without all those great connections and great relationships, and even just people to help coach you through that current situation you might find yourself in.
And this is what we see a lot around ReSourceYYC. We're not, ReSourceYYC is not an incubator, and we don't take a stake in companies. But what we do know is that just surrounding yourself, and not just at ReSourceYYC, but in general, networking and why learn things the hard way the first time, when you can actually reach out to people and help you through there and network and build those connections and relationships, right?
It's so amazing the diverse experience that there is in a city like Calgary or in Western Canada, and you can you meet somebody and they introduce you to somebody else, and next thing you know, you're getting golden nuggets of information left and right. So
that's cool. Good. Well, hey, to wrap it up, any final thoughts or words of advice about maintenance reliability, about starting a company, or anything that you've learned in the last year since you started, less than a year since you started Hyperi, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so Hyperi has really tried to base itself around being adaptable and being adaptable to the needs of a company or a client or a colleague, any one of these networking people, right? So being adaptable and not trying to put things in a box. Of a box of offerings or something as a company, right? And so that's why we focus more on building partnerships with people that have these innovative solutions that we can say, okay, this project could use something like this and like this and like this. Those aren't our companies, but we're able to find the right solution for a situation. And I think that is extremely extremely valuable and builds a lot of, in my opinion, character and integrity when trying to promote projects with clients, because you're not just selling them your products, you're selling them the best solution that you know of.
Well, I think, and I'll just add, because you came from such a variety and you have such a strong experience background, that you can really help connect the dots between, well, what is just merely what seems to be a best practice to actually something that can be successful and roll out and like say integrated and sustainable. So I do think that type of experience and wealth of knowledge is really what makes things successful.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah. So if someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way?
Sure. I'm super active on LinkedIn. I'm
Okay.
always doing posts and
Yeah.
kind of having conversations on there. So I'm really easy
Yeah.
to reach on LinkedIn. I do have my own personal website, which is just
Yeah.
kellytherrien.com. And then we do have the Hyperi website,
Mhm.
which is hyperigroup.com. So you can connect with us on LinkedIn or send us an email through the website or any other, give me a shout.
Perfect. And
Available.
you have a contact page on your website as well? So,
Yeah.
imagine. Good.
So phone numbers, contact page, everything's
Yeah,
on the
perfect.
website, hyperigroup.com.
Good. Well, we'll make sure when we post, when Rosemary posts this podcast out there, that all that information is all included with it. And thanks very much for taking the time today with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Ron. It's been a fun experience.
Yeah, and we're gonna. So your new company. So we'll maybe have to plan a 1-year follow-up or something to see how it's gone and see where you pivoted and where you had the most success. So again, thanks for your time. Rosemary, I'll hand it back to you.
All right. And if anyone's interested, you can also check out the blog that Kelly wrote for us on our blog page. So you can read a little more about some of his opinions. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us and listening to the podcast. And thank you so much, Kelly, for being our guest today.
Thanks again, Kelly.